Another time Jesus said to his disciples, a rich man had a manager who was reported to him for dissipating his property. He summoned him and said, "What is this I hear about you? Give me an account of your service, for it is about to come to an end." The manager thought to himself, "What shall I do next? My employer is sure to dismiss me. I cannot dig ditches. I am ashamed to go begging. I have it. Here is a way to make sure that people will take me into their homes when I am let go." So he called in each of his master's debtors and said to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" The man replied, 100 jars of oil." The manager said, "Take your invoice, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he said to a second, "How much do you owe?" The answer came, 100 measures of wheat. And the manager said, "Take your invoice and make it 80. The owner then gave his devious employee credit for being enterprising. Why? Because the worldly take more initiative than the other worldly when it comes to dealing with their own kind. The Gospel of the Lord. Let us all be seated. Today is Friday of the 31st week of the year. And the Gospel continues to describe to us people who are about to die or whose life is approaching the general judgment day. And so the Gospel says that this manager was confronted by his master and said that his account and service is about to come to an end. Meaning to say, he's about to die and he's about to be judged by God. However, this manager had a defect. He had been misusing the property of the owner, of the master. He was using it for his own personal purposes. Now, the doctrine that Christ is trying to impart to us is that every good thing that God has given us, every good thing, was given to us for us to use it for the salvation of our souls and the salvation of other souls. We don't really have to give up everything as is literally mentioned in the Gospel. What Christ is saying is that everything that we have has to be used properly in accordance to God's will, which is for the salvation of our souls and the salvation of our neighbor. As you will notice, most of the apostles, together with the young rich man who went to Christ, and the couple, Ananias and Sapphira, were told to give up all things. How come Cornelius, the centurion, was not told by Saint Peter to give up all things? And the reason is because Cornelius was advanced in his spiritual life. He knew how to use all his possession for the salvation of his soul and for the salvation of his neighbor. In fact, he had a Christian community living in his house, in his land, and he was sort of the superior of that Christian community, so he knew very well how to use all his possession for the salvation of his soul and the souls of others. But in the case of the young rich man and the beginning of the apostles in their spiritual life, and of the couple Ananias and Sapphira, they did not know how to use their possessions for the salvation of their souls and the souls of others. And so we know that Ananias and Sapphira committed mistakes in how to dispose of them, and they were punished, in which they fell dead at the foot of Christ, of Saint Peter. So, if we know how to dispose our possessions for the salvation of our souls and of others, well, God might allow us to dispose it by ourselves. But if we do not know, and therefore there is a danger that we might misuse them, as Ananias and Sapphira did, just as this manager in today's gospel did. He misused so many of those things given to him by God. He could lose their souls. They could go to hell instead. And so if your knowledge, as the first reading says, if your knowledge is not yet perfect, let those who know better do those things. And so it is a requirement in our life here that we first give up all things and let it be used for the salvation of our souls and the souls of others. Because we are beginners in the spiritual life, if we do it ourselves, there is a danger of committing grave mistake, as the manager in today's gospel have done. Now, in the gospel for today, this manager, while he was still alive, was able to correct his big mistake. He corrected his misuse of the possession of his master by further cheating the master. He called the debtors of the master and tried to minimize their debts, thus fooling and cheating the master. But his intention is the debtors will owe him favor. And therefore, when he is fired by the master, those debtors to whom he had given the favor will receive him in their homes. But if we are the ones dying and we have misused what God has given us, having used them for our own pleasure, using them the way we want, and not the way our Master God wants us to do it, then we are guilty of serious sin. And if we die, we cannot go to heaven, having misused what is God. In today's gospel, the manager could still do something about it. But if we are dying, there is nothing more we can do about it. So fortunately, most of us who have come here have given up all things, though those things may be used for your own salvation and the salvation of others. But there are still a few who have many possessions that are not being used for their own salvation and the salvation of others. And it would even be bad if you have plans to use them according to your own will rather than God's will, in which case we are in grave danger of losing our souls. And so, what should we do? Well, the Gospel says before we die and face God in judgment seat, surrender them to be used by those who know as soon as possible to be used for the salvation of our souls and the salvation of others. Of course, the reasoning others use is, oh, it still cannot be sold, they're still in the bank. Well, that's precisely what is the defect. That those possessions are in a situation that it cannot be used for our salvation and the salvation of our loved ones because it has not been sold or gotten rid of. And so the Gospel says, well, before we die, do immediately something about it. Because if we have misused them, we have no way of correcting that mistake. Though St. Thomas of Aquinas says, well, there is still one last thing that you can do, and that is what you have failed to do before you die. First, forgive all those who have sinned against you, and whatever left things that you have, consecrate them to be distributed in the form of good works. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.